Hello, my name is Ben Gillis. I'm a technology specialist here with Microsoft. I'm joined today by Christina and Ramsey, and the three of us are going to walk you through some deep dive topics around Power Automate Desktop today. We're excited to get going and sharing some lessons we've learned and some questions that we hear frequently come up from customers as we help them understand, evaluate, and use Power Automate Desktop. But before we do, we have to go through a few housekeeping items. First, just so everybody on this call knows, this is being available for multiple people to be able to enjoy. What that means is that as you're in this meeting today, folks might be able to see your name, your avatar, your email address, and have access to that information. If for in any reason that makes you uncomfortable, feel free to drop. Reach out to myself, anyone on this call, or your business application sales specialist to help you learn about this information, maybe in a more one-on-one setting. Second thing to point out, and this is important, we want to encourage you to ask questions as we move. Now, you might be looking around and saying, hey, I'm in this meeting and you've disabled the way for me to ask a question. I have no way to do that. I can't turn my camera on or I can't come off mute. For sure. However, you may notice in the upper right corner the Q&A section. Here, you can post questions. We have a panel of folks available receiving your questions, reviewing them, and if they make sense to share out to the group, they'll post them out so everybody can see your question and see your response. So be sure to go in there and ask questions. Third, this session is being recorded, so that has value. If you need to drop for any reason, no worries, this recording will come out. We also hope that perhaps you see a thing or two in here today that you find interesting and you want to share with a friend. Feel free to do so. We encourage that. Now, we've curated some topics today about Power Automate Desktop that we think might be interesting to you. Now, of course, we're not going through line by line everything Power Automate Desktop can do. That would be a separate webinar, sort of the basics of Power Automate Desktop. Today, we're going to focus on UI elements beyond the recorder. So how can you interact with UI elements when you're not using the recorder or take it to the next level without just simply making a recording? In addition to that, we often hear customers ask about error handling and logging. So let's dive in. Let's cover that topic a little bit. Something exciting we have in the platform that can help scale and offers a tremendous amount of value is something we call hosted machines. So we're going to walk through how they can work with your organization today. And finally, we're going to talk about some best practices, share some best practices for automation with the team. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ramsey, who's going to get us started.
Thanks, Ben. In this next part of our deep dive of Power Automate for Desktop, I'm going to be covering how we can automate using UI elements inside of Power Automate for Desktop. You may be familiar with the desktop recorder. I'm going to be showing how we can build them ourselves manually and with a lot more control.
UI elements are any buttons, text fields, drop downs, any pieces of the application that you can interact with from the front end on your desktop. And in Power Automate for Desktop, on the left actions pane, these UI element actions are in two different categories. The first is in browser automation for when we're automating inside of a web browser on a web page. Right, we're automating our activity there. You can see here those text fields, checkboxes, radio buttons, drop downs, whatever it might be. And then the second category is for UI automation, and this is for basically everything outside of a browser that's running on the desktop. So your desktop apps, any kind of legacy application for which you want to capture the UI elements for. And we can kind of see a similar grouping of actions for interacting with those types of text fields, checkboxes, whatever it might be. Right? Not only can we send inputs into the UI elements, but we can also extract data out of them. So if we have a table or some kind of array that's being shown in our application, we can extract those values, right? So let's pretend that we're automating this legacy desktop application, right? Something that might be, common use case for RPA, one of those applications that doesn't have an API or doesn't have a very accessible API that we can only automate from the front end. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to UI automation and do click UI element in window. I'm going to drag and drop that into my workspace. Now my properties pane will appear. It's just going to ask me for what UI element and what type of click do I want to send to it. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to click on this and do add UI element. Right? Let's say I want to, I want to click on accounts, or maybe I want to select this button for new record. Right? And you can see wherever I hover, my mouse becomes a selectable kind of thing that I can add to my automation, depending on what I want to interact with or how I want to interact with it. You can see here, like let's say this new record button, I can see it says an image or a button. Right? You want to make sure, in this case, it wouldn't matter which one I grab, but sometimes you just want to, make sure that whatever you're capturing, that you can test it, and if there's a better way of capturing that, that you kind of know how to grab that. So I'm just going to grab this button for new record. We can see a screenshot of it in our UI elements pane. When you first load the application, it might show the variables pane, but the UI elements pane is right here on the right, where we can view all the UI elements that we've added to this automation. I can view the window that it's in, and I can click the three dots and click on edit if I want to view the selectors and the selector tree of this individual action. Right? And here, this is where I can add, I can add additional logic. I can change some of this to equal to, contains, starts with. I can modify this, add variables or wildcards to this if I want, and it'll reflect in the selector here. And we can also just have a free-form text editor if we want to create our own selectors. So depending on your familiarity with selectors, this can be of varying help to you. So if I just click on, save here, I can go ahead and test this. Just very, very straightforward. It's just going to click on that new button for me. It's going to move the mouse there and do that. So we've covered how we can kind of capture those UI elements and how we can make edit their selectors. But what if we want to, for example, extract data out of an application using UI elements? And this is kind of like the second part of using UI elements. And for example, let's say we have this. I just pulled up Zillow homes in Dallas, Texas. Let's say I want to extract out some of these values, some of these home results into an Excel sheet or whatever I want. If I want to do that, I go to my web data extraction, right? Similar to UI element data extraction. I'll do extract data from web page, drag and drop that inside the browser instance. I haven't defined that yet, but it doesn't really matter, because I'm going to go into my, with that action open, I'm going to go into my browser, provided that you have the Power Automate extension here. And wherever I hover my mouse, I'll become elements that I can select and pull out of the application. So let's say I want to capture the price. I'll right-click this. I'll extract that. So that just extracts a single value. But what if I want all the values? And here's where Power Automate can use a little bit of intelligence, because when I extract just the second value, it will recognize that it'll automatically capture the entire list for me, right? And we can do things like add pagers. If there's multiple pages to it, you can add pagers and have it cycle through those if you want. And you can also add more values to this, right? So right now it's just a simple list. But if I want to make it a table, let's say we want to next grab the square footage, or I'll just grab the address next. So I will right-click this and extract that that value, and it will automatically generate an array variable for me. Right? Let's say we want the square footage as well. I can capture all of those. If one of these points to a link, let's see if this points to a link. So let's say I don't want to capture the, okay, it looks like couldn't do it. Sometimes it does, but I'll click on finish here. And we see that it's going to extract the records in the form of a 3-column table. I'll have it go directly to a spreadsheet. I'll just add the missing action that we need here to launch to Microsoft Edge. We'll say attach to running, and we'll grab that page there. And then here, browser. So if I run this from here, it will grab those values and take it straight to a Excel file. I could have also sent it straight to a variable so that I could do additional operations on it. But here I just did something quick and sent it to an Excel file. And that is how you automate using UI elements. Now, of course, you're usually going to use these actions in conjunction with others. You can see other actions, even just in the same category, that don't specifically use certain UI elements, but that kind of help you automate it anyway. So, yeah, use your UI elements tab to keep track of everything. You can rename certain things if you want. I'll call this the new record button. And yeah, you can use UI element inspection. There are inspection tools available. There's one available inside of Power Automate for Desktop itself. There's one that you can download that's a Microsoft product, and then there's other things that you can do inside of modern web browsers, such as inspecting certain elements, and grabbing the selector, copying the selector from here. So hope this helps you automate with UI elements.
So we covered how to automate using UI elements inside of Power Automate for Desktop. And now I want to cover the second method of automating with RPA and with Power Automate Desktop, which is automating using screen, mouse, and keyboard actions. So this is used in scenarios when it's difficult or impossible to identify the UI elements and the UI selectors. Maybe you are accessing a sensitive web page that has anti-automation controls built in, for example, a login screen or signature screens. Their selectors can sometimes be encrypted or masked, or they are set to a refresh timer that, so you'll build something and then a couple minutes or a couple hours later, it won't work. Or just, you have difficulty identifying the UI selector overall. There's a second form of automating, and this is a little bit more manual, but since computers only have 2 inputs, mouse and keyboard, you can ensure that your automation, you can automate 100% of it.
Another common way in which this shows up is sometimes through things like login screens or other sensitive screens. The UI elements can be masked or encrypted. This is because they add anti-automation controls. They want to inhibit automation applications from being able to kind of interact with it with their front-end applications programmatically. So they'll encrypt those UI elements, they'll make them hard to grab, or maybe they will have them and refresh them. So after a couple of minutes or a couple of hours, you'll go in and realize your flow doesn't work again. And what we can do in this case is we can use a more manual way of automating our activity, and this is through the group of actions called our mouse and keyboard actions, where we're actually going to use what shows up on the screen and use the mouse and keyboard to specifically interact with the desktop. Right, so it's going to be a little bit less robust, less dynamic. It's going to be dependent on things such as the screen resolution, which no worries, you can change or configure inside of Power Automate for Desktop. So you can get and set the screen resolution. You can check it, make sure it's good, or just make sure your environment's very consistent. But using these mouse and keyboard actions, I can do things like move mouse to image and capture that button or text field that I want as a image. So I'm going to do select image, capture image. Well, I'll make sure that it's shown up first. So here I have the account name. This is where I want it to go. I'm going to do select image, capture the image, and when I capture my image, there are two considerations that I want. The first is I want to make sure that it's unique. So if I just captured it like this, that wouldn't be unique because there's 3 of these on here. So when I capture it, I want to include what says account name because there's only one of those. And also the second consideration is that by default, when you capture this image and tell Power Automate to click on it, by default, it's going to click on the middle of that of the image. You can set an offset if you want in the advanced settings, but sometimes it's usually just easier to make sure that when you capture this, the middle is where you want. So I'm going to capture that. We'll give it a name. And then when I look at the rest of my properties, I'm going to send a click after moving the mouse. If I expand the advanced pane here, we always want to make sure we have a wait for image to appear, just in case it takes a couple seconds. We do have a timeout. You want to make sure you have some form of timeout to make sure that it doesn't hang or anything. It'll wait up to 5 seconds. If it finds it immediately, it'll click on it. If not, it'll wait 5 seconds before erroring. And we can also do a couple of other cool things. We can add the offset if we want, but for the most part, you'll just leave it as is. And we can view our images here in the image tab. Right? This is a little bit more sensitive than the UI elements. So you want to make sure that your environment is consistent. So we've selected on that text box, and then the second thing we want to do is we want to send keystrokes to add our input to it. So I'll do this action for send keys, drag and drop that, and specify what keystrokes I want to send to my desktop when it's selected on that. So here I'm going to write Woodgrove Bank. If it was some kind of login screen, right, I can add other buttons as well. So maybe it's username, and then I have tab. If you don't know the syntax, you can go into here, and then password 123, and then enter. Right, it'll send those keystrokes as I entered them. Right, so really, really powerful. For this one, we'll just do Woodgrove Bank. We can add a delay between the keystrokes. This is in milliseconds, how long to wait before each stroke. Just make sure it's not too fast for your desktop or for your application, so that there's no input errors. When in doubt, you can always make it a little bit slower. It still goes pretty fast, right? That's technically 20 strokes per second. So I'll do save. And if we disable this and run this flow, this subflow, it should there we go. It took a while. Maybe I could have removed some of the white space when I captured it. I could have made it a little bit more specific, but it captured it and entered those keystrokes. So this is really how we can make sure that we can automate the last mile of our automation, right? How we make sure we can automate 100%. Because at the end of the day, computers only have two inputs, mouse and keyboard, and if we can control those, which we can automate anything using RPA. If it's not with the UI elements, then we can do it with the mouse and keyboard actions.
Now I'm going to cover error handling inside of Power Automate for Desktop. Error handling is where we define the steps we want the automation to take when it encounters an exception, and it can be applied at multiple levels within the automation.
The first level that we can add error handling to is the action level. So if we open up any action, we can see this on error button that will take us to our error handling screen here. And this is where we can specify what we want the automation to do, whether we want it to retry the action a certain number of times over a certain time interval, whether we want it to continue the flow run at the next action, or just skip the error, or repeat the action, or go to another label. So you see here that I have a label that takes us directly to email and admin, if that's something that I want to do. I can also click on new rule here to change the value of a variable if I want, or run a subflow. So for example, what I can do is change the value of, for example, a status message to read a specific message that I want. So failed to click button in invoicing app, or whatever custom message that I want. And I can add another rule to, for example, run a subflow. So here I have a subflow that submits this error message to a log of some sort, which I'll show you in a moment. But I can add all this behavior that I want it to do when it encounters a specific exception, right? And then ultimately whether I want it to throw the error or just continue as normal. Another thing that you can do, and I'll use another action for this, is in that error handling screen, if I click on the advanced, we can see actually all of the different types of errors that could possibly be thrown by this specific action. And under this advanced tab, we can actually add custom rules for a specific error, right? Usually you're going to just use it for any error, right? In case it encounters any error, but you have this granularity if you want that. So that's how you add it to a. That's how you add error handling to a specific action. But what we can also do is we can also apply error handling to a whole group of actions, and this is what's known as a block error, or in the industry sometimes you'll hear try catch. And if we click and drag this on block error, I can just say, call this the invoicing app. I want to create error handling. I want to specify the error handling that I want for any error that when I'm working inside of this legacy invoicing app. So here I have like maybe 7 or 8 actions of me working inside of this application, and I want the same error handling regardless of which action triggers it. So I'm going to say that this is the invoicing app errors, and I can do the same thing, right? So I can specify, error in invoicing app, or email admin, or whatever I want to do. Whatever, I configure this, and it's going to give me a start and an end. And what I'm going to do is just drag this here to the end of when I'm working inside of that application. Now we can also configure error handling at an even higher level, so we can apply something to the whole flow, or even at the cloud flow level. But I want to go to this submit to log subflow that I have configured, right? So you'll see that I configured this status message, and then I have this subflow that just submits that status message to a log. What I also did was I also added a label if you want. It could be a subflow or a label. Labels can help you add flow control. So here, this emails an admin with that status message. And here I have a subflow that submits it to a log, just showing the variety here. But what this subflow does is, first it grabs the current date and time and converts it to a string. And then what it does is you have a couple of different ways in which you can log errors other than the default logging inside of Power Automate. But the first is with this log message action. This is one of the actions available in Power Automate for Desktop, where all I've done is said, okay, here's the timestamp, and this is the status message. And you can specify whether it appears as info, warning, or error. We'll say error for this one. And I'll click save. And this log message will appear in the run logs of Power Automate for Desktop. So when you go to your monitoring portal through your browser and view the run history of the RPA flow, it'll appear there inside of the action. The second option, or the second thing that I did here, was I actually wrote the same message, the timestamp and the status message. I wrote that to a totally separate text file, right? So this is something that's really simple to do. It's available to anybody. You could do a text file, CSV file. You could, if your customer has, or if you have your own SQL server database that you want to write the error to SQL, or whatever source you want or destination, you can do that. Here I'm just using a simple text file that I've kept here in. It's just pretty simple, right? Sometimes the simple things end up helping us out quite a bit. What it's going to do is it's just going to append a new line, so I can have this error log keep on going. I can also have it create a new log for if I want. Each time I run this flow, if I wanted to create a log for each one, I can variabilize the path and the name if I want. Yeah, so that's how you can create the logs here. So let's see, did I do anything else here? Yeah, so I just set that status message for another one. For example, application failed to launch. Right, so you have a couple of different options and as to how you want to manage the errors. You can get quite creative as to how you want it to route the flow depending on the behavior of the application. One of the types of creative things that you can do is if you are working with a search bar and your first action executes a search, and then your second action extracts the results of those search or interacts with one of the results. What you can do is you can add error handling if it's appropriate, if this is how your application behaves, that you can add error handling to the second action that interacts with the results. You can say, hey, if you go to interact with the results and there's nothing there, that's going to trigger an error. So what I can do is I can add error handling to that action. If having nothing there is going to trigger an error, I can add that error handling and have it execute different actions or a different subflow or whatever I want to do. It can be quite helpful. You can use it to kind of make your flows really robust. You can use it to add retries and to kind of orchestrate between different subflows and log activity. Creating your own custom logs. This is something that's really common, really popular. So just so that you can kind of customize the what you see when a flow finally runs.
That concludes error handling and logging inside of Power Automate for Desktop. And now I'm going to pass it back to Ben.
Thanks, Ramsey. Up next, we really wanted to talk about hosted machines. And when it comes to hosted machines, it's really all about scale. How can you scale to have the number of VMs you need in order to do the automations that you would like to have? Well, we're all familiar with the process that can be required to get a new VM. Going through the appropriate channels to make the request, going through and justifying that request from an IT perspective, getting that virtual machine stood up, the image you created, the networking, the account set up to run that VM, installing and registering the Power Automate desktop application on that VM, and then finally getting access to a VM that we can use to do an automation. The idea behind hosted machines is to really streamline and eliminate as much of this process as possible. With hosted RPA, we really want to be able to support the end-to-end automation lifecycle with two different components. The two things that make up the hosted machine offering are first hosted machines. Now, hosted machines are exactly as they sound. It's an individual VM that is hosted by Microsoft without any need for your organization to have any other costs for hosting that VM. It's really good for one-off use cases. If you have sort of like a VM that's needed to do an automation, maybe a business user is building an automation and they're going to run that automation on a machine, great, we got that. It's also really good for development purposes. You want to test out an automation, you need a VM for that purpose, great. We have another component, though, when it comes to scale, and it actually enables auto scaling. It's called hosted machine groups. And hosted machine groups are great for those unattended production automations. Those automations where, in the morning, maybe we have 10 or 20 of a thing or hundreds of a thing kind of running at one specific time. And we need to be able to scale up to handle that volume on demand or really automatically. The idea behind hosted machines for us is that we've really tried to take this ability to create these things, these hosted machines and these hosted machine groups, and bring them together into one very simple to use wizard-like interface within the Power Automate Maker portal. First one we're going to take a look at is hosted machines. And hosted machines are, as they sound, they're a dedicated machine that you can spin up and have available within minutes to deploy and start doing automations or testing automations. A couple of values behind these. One is that there's no need to install or register anything related to Power Automate Desktop. It comes pre-installed and it actually automatically registers to the user that creates the machine. In addition to that, you can utilize really a stock image that we have that's available to run automations that comes with like an Edge browser, and you can do automations in a browser using that stock image, or you can bring your custom VM images to the experience. So if you have a custom image that has custom software on it, you can bring that into the mix. In addition to that, our hosted machines are something that are also able to be joined to your network. They Azure AD join with credentials, and then of course you can set up a VNet to connect them to resources that are local to your organization. Let's take a look at the process for setting up a machine. So we talked about the process, involving IT and getting the resources and installing the thing at the beginning. And here's how that's streamlined for hosted machines. I'm a user. I want one. I have the right permissions, of course, to Power Automate, to the Power Platform to create them. I'm assuming all that, right? I can go into the system and I can hit the button to create a machine. Then automatically, the VM is going to be created. I'm going to be able to identify the network that I want to join. The installation of Power Automate Desktop is going to take place, and I will have a VM that I can use in a matter of minutes, less than an hour, to kind of get this stood up and running. So let's take a look at that. Here I am in Power Automate, just sort of on the landing page in the environment, and I'm going to pull up a flow that I have. Now, this particular flow that we're looking at is something that's pretty standard. So it's a flow that runs on a time interval, and basically what it does is it goes to Dataverse and it captures a bunch of feedback that we have from customers. We have that feedback captured there. It's then going to take that table of feedback, send it off to Azure OpenAI to summarize it and do an approval. Now, what we'd like to do, though, is we'd like to then take this feedback summary and populate it into a web application that we have. Hence the need to bring in, and to bring in a hosted machine. So let's go ahead and do that. So here we are in the, back in the Power Automate landing page. We're going to go click on Monitor and click on Machines. And then in the top left of the screen, we're going to click the New button, and we're going to click that we want to do a new hosted machine. Here, we'll give our hosted machine a name. Jonah's development machine. Sure, that works. That sounds good. We'll click the Next button. We'll choose, do we want to use the default image that's available, or do we want to select an image from an Azure Compute Gallery of images that have been made available to use for hosted machine VMs? We're going to go ahead and choose the default machine in our example. Now that we've selected that default machine, we can choose whether or not we would like to select a network. Join a VNet to make this be able to access local resources. Simple example, demo mode here. I'm just going to click Next. And we can review our machine. Now I'm going to hit Create, and it would take a few minutes to spin this machine up. But through the magic of demoing, I have my machine ready to go, and I can just launch into that. Here I could see anything that's run on the machine. Obviously, this is new, so we haven't run anything yet. But if you see up there in the ribbon, we can open this in the browser and actually launch into this VM to be able to start working and building our automation. So let's do that. So we launch into the virtual machine. It loads for us. We're going to pull up Power Automate Desktop and build a flow. So let's call this recap form, filling out a recap form, a recap application. I'm going to quickly just go ahead and launch a browser here. And then, of course, just kind of like say we recorded the steps and put them in here. Let's just take a look at that here quick. Of course, opens up our form, fills it out. Thanks. Wonderful. Beautiful. We'll go ahead and save that. And then, of course, now that we've built that automation on the hosted machine that you're seeing here, works just like any other VM, right? We'll revisit our flow, and we'll go in and add our step to go ahead and call that particular customer recap form. And we'll click our connections here, and we'll choose our connection to our hosted machine. And we could run it in attended or unattended, of course, filling in the details from our response and whatnot. That we need to kind of fill in on the app, the completion date. And then we're good to go. Now our flow could runs right on that virtual machine that we've created as a hosted machine in this example. So next we want to talk about how we take it to the next level, right? So that's about scaling. So yeah, it's great that we could have a hosted machine and then that machine can run, but a hosted machine can only do one thing at a time, right? So what about when we need to take 10 or 15 or 20 of those feedbacks and loop them in all at the same time? Well, that's where we come into using hosted machine groups. And if you look at the sort of benefits that come with a hosted machine group, a lot of them are the same. But where you really get into having something different is the fact that we can automatically load balance based on the workload in the environment. So we can automatically scale out and scale in for the number of machines we need to complete a task based on the workload that we're getting, right now, real time. So let's walk through an example. I think examples kind of spell it out. So let's say we allocated 10 hosted RPA add-ons to an environment. So we assign those to an environment just like we assign other resources and capacity to environments in the Power Platform. And we got these 10 hosted RPA add-ons. And these 10 hosted RPA add-ons are going to be able to be used across a few different scenarios. Well, one of those, and these are our hosted machine groups, is for invoice processing. Another one is for sales processing. And a third is for refund request processing. Now, it's important to note that these don't have to be like just one flow. So, for example, in our invoice processing, we might have a specific flow for IT invoices. We might have another one for sales invoices and another one for marketing invoices. But in general, this hosted machine group is for processing invoices, and the virtual machine that we use has the software on it that needed to do invoice processing, right? In the middle one, with our sales processing, we're doing account setups, order entry, and contract approvals. And in our refund request process, we're doing returns, exchanges, and refunds. So the idea and the way that this would work is best illustrated in a graph. So I have a graph here. It's a very simple graph. Across the bottom of my screen, I have time. And across the left there, I have the number of bots. So basically you can see, and let's just say this is like a day of us sitting here working, right? Of course, it's a 24-hour clock, but just for the sake of argument, this is during the day where we're working today. So in the morning, there are actually a bunch, you can see, of invoice processing requests coming in. So what that means for our 10 hosted RPA add-ons that are available in this environment, all 10 of them are being consumed to do invoice processing. It's consuming all 10 of them. But then you can see sometime here, I don't know, mid-morning, maybe this is like 10 a.m. or something, who knows, right? We have a drop-off in demand for invoice processing, and we pick up some processing from sales processing. So we have, at this point, 5 machines running invoice processing and another 4 machines running sales processing. And it continues that way for a while until a little bit later in the day. Maybe this is like 11 o'clock, right? At 11 o'clock, the demand drops a little bit down on the invoice processing, but increases. So we have still the same 9 demand of machines, but one of them now is not doing invoice processing, and one of those 9 has switched over to doing sales processing. And we can continue on through the day to a little bit past lunchtime when our invoice processing drops off, and now we have a total of 7, and then it bumps up to 8 machines running, with the vast majority of them doing sales processing, and one of them being utilized for actually now we've brought in the refund request. And that continues through the majority of the day till towards the end of the day when maybe mid-afternoon, something like this, 2:30 coffee break time, something like that. Our new sales processing kind of drops off, and we're now just using the machines to process refund requests. So again, the idea here is that, instead of needing, if we wanted to say, okay, well, at the peak, we're going to have 10 machines running invoice processing, and at the peak, we're going to have 9 machines running sales processing, and at the peak, we're going to have 5 running, or maybe 6, 5 or 6, we'll say 5 running refund request processing at peak. So we need 10, 19, 24 machines. Well, no, you don't. You don't need 24 machines. You don't need to have machines dedicated to running these refund processing all the time, because the demand for that is only here towards this portion of the day. So really, we only need 10 machines because we can share across these various workloads with hosted machines, and that's really what they're all about. What we want to do next is jump in and show you just the ease at which you can create a hosted machine group inside of the Power Platform. So here we are again on sort of that landing page inside of the system, inside of Power Automate, the Maker portal. We're just going to go ahead and select the new button up here, and we're going to go ahead and create a new hosted machine group. Really quite simple. We give it a name. We'll just put invoice processing in here. Why not? Like, heck, simple, right? We'll hit next. And we can choose whether or not this could be reused, meaning it's locked to be reused again by another bot. If we wanted to kind of keep it open to allow for faster processing, reuse can be a really valuable option. We're going to click next here. Now we can say for this host machine group, right? There's a certain number of bots in our environment. How many can this hosted machine group use? I could limit this to only being able to use a few of the bots. Let's go all the way to the end. Okay, 10. So that means that this hosted machine group can use up to 10 bots to process the requests that come into that group. We'll go to next. Again, just like last time, we can choose whether or not we want to use the default image or pick from an Azure Compute Gallery if you've linked one in here. We didn't, so we're just going to do the default. And we'll hit next. Okay, we have the option of whether we're going to connect with just local credentials in that machine or use, our AD credentials. We're going to use the AD credentials. And then we review what we said we want to do, and we hit create. At this point, we have our machine. It's ready to go, our hosted machine group. Just as we would be able to see machines, we can come into the group and see all the runs that are happening across that group. This group will now be able to scale up and use up to 10 machines to complete all the jobs you send. So hopefully you're able to see how hosted RPA can help streamline and automate your processes. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Christina, who is going to go over some best practices. Christina, over to you.
Thanks, Ben. Now that's some really great stuff that both you and Ramsey presented. Now what I'm going to talk about are some recommendations and best practices for building your flows in Power Automate Desktop. The first thing I want to talk about is planning your flow before creating it. There are some questions you can ask yourself when you're planning your flow, such as, what is the goal or purpose of your flow? What are the inputs and outputs? What are the steps or actions that your flow needs to perform? What are the dependencies or prerequisites of your flow? What are some of the possible errors or exceptions your flow could encounter? How will you handle the errors or exceptions in your flow? How will you test and debug your flow? And how will you monitor and maintain your flow? When you start building your flow, it is recommended that you use descriptive names and comments for your actions and variables. You'll want to use descriptive naming to clearly convey the function of your action or the value of your variable. You'll also should adopt consistent naming conventions such as camel case, Pascal case, or snake case. Avoid spaces, no special characters, and don't use any reserved words in your naming. To make effective use of your comments, describe the logic and purpose of your actions and variables. And then you can also mark sections or steps of your workflow using comments for better workflow organization. For example, step 1, launch the application. You should also use comments to explain any complex or unclear logic. Now you saw Ramsey demonstrate how to do error handling in your desktop flow. You can use error handling and logging to handle exceptions and monitor your workflow. Use the log message action to log custom messages to log files or the console. You can also use the save screenshot action to capture and save snapshots of workflow states, specific windows, or critical elements. You'll also want to implement try-catch finally blocks. Utilize the try-catch finally action so you can encapsulate your workflow or critical sections to ensure that the execution is done in a try block, your error handling and resolution is in a catch block, and your cleanup or final actions is in a finally block. And then you can also utilize the throw action to trigger your own custom error messages or exceptions. For example, invalid input, product not found, or out of stock. When working with data, it is recommended that you use parameters with your data sources to store and reuse data. Utilize parameters for reusability and maintainability in your desktop flow. You can easily manage and configure your parameters in Power Automate Desktop to set the data types, the default value, and the descriptions for each parameter. You can also employ the input dialog box to assign values to parameters during runtime and use the input action to prompt a user for input during the flow execution. If you want to use the output dialog box to define output variables storing data returning from your desktop flow to your cloud flow. And then you can manage your data sources with the data sources pane to add, edit, and delete your data sources. There are some considerations with security. You'll want to implement secure best practices when handling sensitive data through parameters, and you should also safeguard the information and adhere to data privacy regulations. When you're working with web automation, use dynamic selectors and waiting for elements. Use dynamic selectors for adaptability. It's better to use the dynamic selectors instead of hard coding values when targeting web elements. Your dynamic selectors can use variables, operators, or regular expressions to make the selector more flexible and adaptable to changes in the web page. This is extremely useful when web elements have attributes that change every time the web page is loaded or refreshed. So just as you saw Ramsey demonstrate, you can inspect your selectors, extract it from multiple instances of a web page, and determine what remains the same in every instance. Then you can edit the CSS selector and modify the operator of the attribute that changes accordingly. You can also add a fallback selector by separating two CSS selectors with a comma. You can easily customize the selector using the selector builder. This allows you to parse variables in a selector and use them to target specific elements in a table or list. For example, if you want to point to a row in a column of an element you want to select, you can use var row and var col. The waiting for elements actions helps prevent timing issues for increased reliability. You can use if web element exists to check if a web element is present on a web page and then perform different actions based on the result. You can use wait for window content to suspend the execution of your automation until a specific piece of text or UI element appears or disappears from a window. Use the wait for web page content to wait until a web page contains or does not contain a specific web element. You can use logical operators such as and, or, and not to combine multiple web elements in a condition. Use the wait for image action to wait until an image appears or disappears from the screen. And then use wait for file to wait until a specific file is created, modified, or deleted. For desktop automation, as Ramsey discussed, you should use keyboard shortcuts and minimize and maximize windows. You can utilize the set window state action to effectively minimize and maximize windows. This will help improve accessibility to the UI elements that may not be visible on a screen, which can enhance your overall desktop flow performance. For keystroke precision, use the send keys action to send keystrokes to an active application. In this example, I'm using the send keys action to send Control B to a foreground window, and I have a 10-second delay between keystrokes. Before you use the send keys action, it's recommended that you use the focus window action to activate the window of an application. This helps ensure that your send keys action is targeting the correct window. To get window details for positioning, you can use the get details of a window action to retrieve the position and size of a window and store that in a variable for later use. This action helps it so that you can move or resize a window as needed and also allows you to compare window attributes with expected values. Selectors are also supported with desktop automation. Similar to web automation, you can leverage dynamic selectors in desktop applications to help create a flexible and more robust UI automation. You can use variables or expressions for identifying your dynamic UI elements within the applications. As Ramsey discussed, there are also ways for testing and debugging your flow. You can debug your flow using the errors pane. You can also add breakpoints into your flow. You can also use the Run Next Action button to run the flow action by action. The way that works is, after each action is completed, the flow is paused. You can open the Variables pane to check the value of any variable at the point where it's paused. This is extremely useful for debugging. And then you can also use Run From Here. Now, it is recommended that you test the automation each time you add a new step. That way you ensure that you catch any mistakes. That helps rather than attempting to build the entire flow and testing it. So, best practice, as you add steps, continue to test your flow as you continue to build. Now let's talk about some recommendations for optimizing your flow for better performance and reliability. Start off small. Start small and use templates. It's a good idea to start with a simple flow that performs a basic task and then build on it gradually. You can use the templates provided by Power Automate Desktop to get started quickly, and that'll also help you learn from the best practices embedded in them. Another thing you're going to want to do is avoid infinite loops. Use child workflows. Infinite loops can cause your flow to run endlessly and consume a lot of resources. To prevent this, you should always use a condition or a counter to exit a loop. You can also use child workflows to break down your flow into smaller and reusable components that can be called from the main flow. When working with data and having database changes, improve your flow performance by storing your data in variables, as mentioned before, and update your database only at the end of the flow. Another recommendation is to save disk space by deleting unnecessary files. Configure your flows to automatically remove completed runs after a certain period of time. And then keep your error logs and handle exceptions. Errors and exceptions can occur during the flow execution due to various reasons, such as network issues, application crashes, or unexpected inputs. You should always use the error handling actions provided by Power Automate Desktop to catch and handle the errors gracefully. You should also log the errors and their details to a file or database for troubleshooting and debugging purposes. If you're running multiple desktop flows at the same time, you should distribute the load across different machines. This will help prevent timeout and performance issues. You can use machine groups to run your desktop flows with identical configurations in parallel. And you can also use gateway clusters to distribute the desktop flow runs evenly across gateways in a cluster. To support long-running flows, for flows that run longer than 24 hours, you should adjust the default timeout settings on the flow. You should also use the wait for window action to wait for a window to appear or disappear before proceeding with the next action. This will help ensure that your long-running flows avoid timeouts. To gain more insights into your flow run logs and performance metrics, you can leverage the Power Automate RPA Run Log Analytics dashboard in Power BI. And you can also automate the administrative tasks by using the PowerShell commandlets and the Power Automate management and admin connectors. You can automate actions such as disabling, enabling flows, modifying environments, and setting permissions. The last thing I want to talk about is how you can monitor your desktop flows. You can use the Desktop Flow Activity dashboard available in the Power Automate portal. This dashboard will provide information such as the run, status, duration, errors. This dashboard can help you quickly identify issues and troubleshoot bottlenecks to ensure that you have smooth flow execution. In this dashboard, you will also be able to monitor your machine and your machine groups, as well as being able to monitor your current runs. The current runs page is going to give you information showing you both the current, running, and currently queued flows, which can help you identify backlog runs. You can also monitor your desktop flows through the Center of Excellence integration. For more information on the COE Starter Kit, please visit aka.ms/COE Starter Kit. This wraps up my part of the presentation, and now I'll hand it back off to you, Ben.
Thanks, Christina. Those were some really cool best practices. Well, guys, we've reached the end. Thank you for joining us today with our webinar. We hope that you were able to dive deep with us with Power Automate Desktop and picked up a few tidbits you can take back to your organization. We wanted to leave you with some links here that you can access to help you take those next steps, whether that's learning, exploring, or connecting with folks on the Power Platform. Special links on the right there around using RPA, including our workshop for getting started with a RPA in a day, learning about process mining. We have a tutorial of how that works there for you, an overview of Power Automate, and some tips in terms of adoption. As far as next steps go, reach out to your business application specialist to start the conversation. Happy to chat with you about how RPA can help your business. With that, thank you very much and have a great day.